why we need vaccines. So we have KJ Harrison, and I'm Hollie Walker, and unfortunately we had an unlucky citizen who died from a vaccine-preventable disease. So he will not be joining us today. We will be talking about vaccines, and I'm going to turn the time over to KJ Harrison.
Poor guy, that's why you got to get vaccinated. Okay, thank you, Holly. So I wanted to do kind of a little activity. I want to start it out showing a series of images. We'll talk about them, and then at the end, we'll wrap it all together. It'll all make sense. So this first image here is a picture of someone that has measles, kind of what a light case of measles looks like. Now, measles is a disease that's been around for quite a long time. Nowadays, worldwide, it affects about 20 million people. Now, in the United States, pre-1963, about 3 to 4 million people every year were affected by the measles. That's a pretty good amount, and a good amount of those people actually were affected to the point that they died from it. Now, I use the mark of 1963 is because that's when the first vaccine for the measles was introduced in the United States. After that, the numbers have gone down considerably, so much to the fact that in 2014, there was a quote-unquote outbreak of the measles in the United States where only 644 people were affected by it. So 4 million to 644 is a pretty big gap there. Now, kind of just an interesting side note, in 2015, there was another notorious outbreak of measles, happened in Disneyland of all places. Guess it's not the happiest place on earth. Anyways, so it's very contagious and it can spread pretty quickly if contracted and not taken care of. Now, in the next image is a picture of a guy who has a disease that we've all heard of. It's the flu. Everybody seems to get symptoms of the flu during certain times of year, and we hear about it all the time where you got to get vaccinated for the flu season and this and this and that. Now, the flu can take several different forms. Some of them can be a little more dangerous than others. Some of the more notorious outbreaks of the flu that we've heard of are, for example, like the bird flu, swine flu. The biggest outbreak in the early 1900s was the Spanish flu. This is actually the biggest outbreak of any disease in the entire history of the world that we know of, anyways. About 1/3 of the world's population was affected in 1918. And of that 1/3 of the population, 50 million people were actually killed from the virus. That's a huge amount of the world's population that was just wiped out because of the flu. Now, in the 1930s was when the vaccine for the flu was first introduced. It's been kind of adapted throughout the years to adjust to the different strands of influenza of the flu that have kind of presented themselves over the years. But 1930s was when it first happened, when it was first introduced in the United States. The next picture is, we're going to talk about tetanus, otherwise known as lockjaw. Tetanus is a disease that affects the nervous system in the body, causes severe muscle spasms, among other things, fever. You can get it from like stepping on a rusty nail, grabbing a rusty piece of barbed wire. It also lives in like soil, dust, and it enters the body through cuts in the skin, open wounds where it can get into the bloodstream. Now, tetanus is not as common nowadays to get affected, but it can still be pretty deadly. So much to the fact that 1 in 5 people who actually get tetanus will die from it. It's very aggressive in the way that it attacks the nervous system. Now, the vaccination that was introduced in 1924 and has been again modified to the present day is actually the only way to prevent tetanus in anybody. Next picture is close up what the Hep B or hepatitis B, also known as HBV virus, looks like. Now, hepatitis B is a virus that attacks the liver. It can cause severe liver disease, even liver cancer. Now, in the United States, there are about estimated up to 1.4 million people who suffer from chronic hepatitis B. They have that in their system. To one degree or another, they're affected by it. Every year, upwards of 4,000 people actually die from hepatitis B. It's usually not from hepatitis B directly, but hepatitis B will cause, again, liver disease or liver cancer in their bodies, and that's what they end up passing away from. 1982 is the first year that the hepatitis B virus was introduced in the United States, and the cool thing about that is actually the first anti-cancer virus, because it has been proven to prevent liver cancer, which is actually pretty awesome. The last picture here, again, another disease we've all heard of and are probably very common with, very familiar with either personally or through kids or whatever, it's chicken pox. We get a lot of those little red bumps on our body. It itches like crazy. It forms scabs, and it's just a whole big mess. Chicken pox, it's a very common virus in the United States, to the tune of about 5 million people a year are affected by the chicken pox. The fatality rate is a lot lower. It ends up being about 100 a year, and that's usually from infants, very small children whose immune systems aren't developed enough to fight it. But the chickenpox virus, or excuse me, the vaccine was introduced in 1995 in the United States, and since then, again, the numbers have gone down considerably in this term, in the sense of the amount of people that are fatally affected by it. Now, a couple things that all of these viruses have in common, one being that they've been very impactful on world history and U.S. history. More specifically, they've had a huge effect on the way that things have developed medically. And the second thing is there's a vaccine to prevent all of these viruses. So you don't need to go to bed and worry about that you're going to wake up with one of these viruses. You can actually prevent it. So that's why we want to talk about today why it's important to get vaccinated, the benefits of vaccines. And so I'm going to turn this over to Holly, and she's going to explain a little bit more about that.
Thanks, KJ. All right, guys, before vaccines, we had a rate of 21,000 deaths for diphtheria alone. And guess what? Today, we have no reported cases. And when we talk about the flu, before vaccines, there was over 20,000 deaths per year. And now we have maybe 243. That's a pretty big difference. Now with Hep A, we have over 117,000 for the vaccine. Now there's only maybe 11,000 that are actually reported, but most of these can actually, you can have treatment for it. Now when we talk about hepatitis B, there were 66,000, over 66,000 cases of people dying. And today we maybe have 11,000 cases, but a lot of it we can work with it through treatment. So that's a big thing too. Now with measles, before the vaccine, we actually had over 530,000 cases of people dying, and probably little children, if anything. And now we have maybe 61 cases. I think that's a pretty significant difference of what vaccines have done for the entire world. Now, it's not required. It's not something you have to have. But if your child is going to attend a public school, it is actually something that is required. You want to make sure that your child is not getting sent into the lion's den. And what I mean by that is you don't want to send them in with a wide range of viruses. You want to make sure that they're vaccinated, that they're safe to go to school every single time. Now, I've heard the excuses many times of why they don't get their kids vaccinated. Needles hurt. Watching your kid get poked many times is not fun. Watching them cry because, you know, the nurse comes in and pokes them. I understand that. But it is a means to an end. It doesn't hurt for very long, and the child does not need to be there having them poked 20 times. Also, I've heard it's unnecessary. That's not true either. Because if you think about it, when we talk a little bit later about herd immunity, it is. If you have your child go out in public, you want to make sure that they are actually protected. Now, vaccines have been said that they cause illness. No, they actually don't. Put a immunity in there so that your body can build up, make sure that it doesn't have the sickness as much. Now, you may get a little bit sick, nowhere near what the virus would have done. Even the vaccines cause autism. Now, that's a huge one. That one caused a lot of uproar that still today people are having major problems with getting vaccines because they think their child will get autism. It's not true. And the guy who actually said that and turned in the reports, sitting in prison right now. So obviously, they found a lot of his data to be inaccurate. And for the uneducated, there's many uneducated people who don't understand what vaccines can do for their child. And I just encourage anybody who is uneducated about vaccines to do your homework, check it out, make sure that you have the facts. And guess what? Cost is a big one. And especially for low-income families, you can actually go into any clinic, doctor's office, a health clinic, and you can have a vaccine for children from 19 and younger, low cost or no cost, because of the program that they created just for vaccines for children. So that's pretty awesome. Adults need them too. You can even get them at a pharmacy. So make sure you get vaccinated. So we're going to watch this video. I created this in 2014, and it talks a little bit more about what the vaccines have been able to do for us. So
Okay, so while we're getting this back up there, obviously we can see that the results are undeniable. Vaccines help. We can see from this in measles, polio, hepatitis B, all these different things. They've decreased so much. In the case of polio, it's been completely eliminated from the Western Hemisphere. And one of the reasons that is from the concept of herd immunity. Now, I think herd immunity is a good summation of why it's important to get vaccinated. It kind of boils it all down to this point. So kind of think about it this way, a few different examples. You've got population 1, where there's a couple people who are affected with disease, but nobody else gets vaccinated. Later down the road, that contagious virus is going to spread, and the vast majority of the population is going to end up being affected by it. All right, go back, population 1. If you get a few people who are immunized, they get the vaccination, and there's a couple people that are affected by the virus, that's still going to spread, but not nearly as much. And especially the people who have been vaccinated, they're not going to get affected by it. Now, population 1 again, if the vast majority of people get vaccinated, even though there's a couple people who have a virus that's contagious, that contagious virus is going to be spread when you look down the road, or it's going to be contained when you look farther down the road. It's not going to spread. And that's a good kind of concept to think about, that when you get vaccinated, it's not just for you. You're not the only one that's affected by it. You're really taking a step to protect the community as a whole. Now, if we go back to the example of the public schools, kids are walking into a veritable cesspool of different diseases, from kids coughing and sneezing and wiping their nose and putting on stuff. they can get sick from so many different things. So having them vaccinated and having the majority of those kids vaccinated, the herd immunity is going to take effect, and the diseases that may pop up in like a public school or any other setting where there's a big group of people, it's not going to be as bad. It's not going to spread. And we've already seen, as again I said, with polio, measles, and several other different diseases, it works. Now, research has been done to show that for the amount of people that actually would need to be vaccinated for herd immunity to be effective is about 83% and above. Anything below that, it's not as effective. So that's why we're all in this together. We all got to be working towards it. And last thing we want to talk about, Holly actually has a personal example of why it's important to get vaccinated, something that she experienced. So I'll go ahead and let her tell you about that, and we'll finish up.
Okay, thanks, KJ. When I was pregnant with my second child, I was actually exposed by another person to Fifth's disease. I hadn't really understood what Fifth's disease was, and so after doing some research, I was actually told I needed to go to the hospital and get checked to see if I had enough immunity so it didn't harm my baby. Obviously, I was very upset of what that meant. And when I did some research, it actually showed that there would be major kidney and organ failure if I did not have enough immunity. So I went and got a test, and of course it came back that I was okay, mainly because I had actually had vaccines. I also had chickenpox as a child, and because of that, my child was actually protected because of those vaccines. So I had enough immunity in my body to protect my child. To me, that was highly important, obviously, because to this day, she's never had a problem and her immune system is really strong. So I highly encourage getting vaccinated. Now, guys, know your facts. Get immunized, not compromised. Send your children to school knowing that they're not going to come home with measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox even. So make sure you know what you can do, and then do it. Know your facts.
That's right. So that's our invitation to you. That's our call to action. Get to know about it. If you don't have kids, for your future kids, join the fight with us. We're all in this together. Make sure we can make this world a little bit better place.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.